Hi, everyone. This is Gigi Haycock, and I'm one of the programmers at the SF Fest in 2023. And I am happy to have with me Matt Bass, who is the director, writer, and producer of Sk8 Face. So so happy to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. I see you have some boards on the back behind you, which is awesome. So
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm an avid collector of
yeah,
that, a handful of them.
just a
Yeah,
handful. It's just the ones in your office, right?
yeah,
So
there's
you've been
quite a
doing this
few.
for 10 years, actually this film for
Oh,
10 years.
yeah, actually a little bit longer. I've been working on this thing for almost 15, minus COVID, because COVID was kind of
Right.
a curveball. But
Right.
yeah, it's been a passion project for a very long time.
Yeah.
It's
And have you been, how long have you been skating?
Oh, I started skateboarding in elementary school on like a little plastic board with, skinny fiberglass thing. So
Yeah.
long time,
I think
long
I
time.
had ball bearings in mine and back.
Yeah, I think that original board had loose ball bearings because I remember the wheels and stuff and taking them apart and trying to put the balls back in there. Yeah,
Yeah.
fun
So
stuff.
so how did the journey start? I mean, can you just kind of take us through like when you started it and where you're at, now with the finished product?
Yeah, it started, I wanted to do something that was bigger than these smaller projects that I was working on as just like a director DP. And I wanted to do something that was like significant. And so I knew that I wanted to do something that was close to me and passionate. And so it just seemed like an obvious fit because I always loved skateboarding and I love the art. And I was getting into documentaries and it just kind of had like an aha moment. I had been reading at the time, Sean Cliver's book, Disposable had come out. And I was like, this was just like the greatest book ever. And so that book really kind of motivated me to dig deeper and find out more about what was actually developing behind the scenes when all these skateboards are being made. Because as a skateboarder growing up, you just see the graphics, but you don't really know the stories behind it, right? And the
Right.
internet didn't exist back then. So all you had was what was in the skate shop and the magazines that would come out monthly, but you didn't get to dig in and find out all this stuff. And that book kind of opened up the doors and then the journey began. Yeah.
Yeah. And you have a lot of really amazing people talking to you about, the whole history of it too. So that must have been, I mean, obviously part of the process of finding those people and getting them to,
Yeah,
participate.
that was one of the reasons why it took so long, actually, because I was very persistent in getting, specific people, and it wasn't necessarily easy to either locate them or talk them into doing it, or they were busy or I was busy. And so I didn't want to just do like 5 people and tell the story, because I really feel like I'm telling their story, right? I'm just piecing together what they created, so I just kind of see myself as like collaging history. And because it
Yeah.
was such a long expansive time frame, I had to go back generations and find people to kind of tell that story. So it was like a scavenger hunt of people.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of incredible. I mean, and to see how, I mean, I think now we have X Games and, we have the Do Tour and stuff like that and the Olympics now and stuff. So maybe it's more in our it's not just in LA, it's not just in, what I mean? It's like, it's being seen around the world and stuff like that. So I think this is a really great time to be, looking at it and then seeing it not only like what it used to be, but as it becomes an art form and then it becomes to be on gallery walls. And that's really, I mean, I think you do a great job of kind of taking us through, with the people who did it, like you said, having them tell the story.
Yeah, thank you. That was like the thesis of the film from the beginning. And by the time we came to, years later, it was actually happening, right? In the beginning, skateboards really were in museums and galleries, and it wasn't really part of pop culture when I first started this this project, and it was like you could kind of see it was going that way as skateboarding got more popular, and street art became a thing, and people were more interested in art in general. And that kind of expanded with the internet because people were able to see more and educate themselves. And so it was really fun kind of digging into these, artists and getting their stories and kind of piecing together how it kind of inspired the next. Because the one thing about the film is a lot of people would be like, who's the main character in the film? And I'd be like, the skateboard, right? And they're like, a skateboard can't be the main character. I'm like, well, it is, right? And that was kind of like a funny struggle thing that I went when I was talking to people about it, because they're like, a skateboard is not a person. I'm like, in this case, it is, right? Because
Yeah.
what essentially happens is like, people pass on the inspiration, right? And so it's just this canvas that keeps getting passed on, which
Yeah,
was,
and there are so many like skateboarders who are actually connected to that artwork, like the
yeah,
hand, and
yes,
all that. Yeah.
absolutely. That was one of the things. It's like, in the beginning, it was just, simple graphics, and there were just people just words on boards, and it wasn't really about art. And then like Dogtown happened and West Homestead, and it became like the full board, and this is who we are. And it was kind of heartful and soulful as opposed to like generic graphic corporate stuff. And then eventually it
Mhm.
became like the skateboarders themselves started doing their own art. And that is something that I always really loved, because that kind of inspired me and my friends growing up skateboarding. It was just like, you don't have to draw like Michelangelo to make art, right? You could do scribbles and just express yourself. And I think that's what really like connected me to skateboarding and the skateboard art, was that like these artists like Neil Blender and Mark Gonzalez was like, they were doing this art that was very personal to them, but expressive. And then that was
Yeah.
something that we were all like, wow, we could do this.
Yeah. And then the photography part of it too, right? Because you
Yeah,
didn't have the internet and stuff like that, and you're just showing them and maybe in Thrasher or something like that. But then those shots when you're like up on the lip and of the, being able to see the graphic on the bottom of the
yeah,
skateboard.
absolutely. That was actually kind of coincided with the birth of skateboard artists as graphics designers or
Right.
artists, was because they started getting out of the bowl. And then like before, there was nothing on the bottom of the board, right? Then it all
Yeah.
became evident that like, wow, this is what we're seeing. And then it just developed, there's like a lot of amazing photographers like Glenn Freeman and Grant Britton and, Stesic. These guys saw what was happening and they were like, wow. And they always had these amazing ways of telling stories through photography. It wasn't just about like the action shot. It was about like the style and where they were, and the wide
Yeah.
angle lenses, and all that stuff was something that always inspired me as a kid. Was actually the photography is kind of what inspired me to become interested in filmmaking, is actually those particular photographers in general. Of course there's others, but those,
Yeah. Yeah. There's it was kind of interesting to see, you talk about Dogtown and stuff, and then see these guys later that you're able to interview back, and and they're talking about the evolution even of their own, uh, careers in a way of
yeah,
skateboarding. But then it takes it, I guess, from you know the ground to the wall,
right.
basically. And it was really interesting to hear some of them. They sounded like, yes, we want to see it, in art galleries and things, but then the same person will kind of say in the next one, but it's, you got to write it or whatever. So it seems like there might be, they're conflicting, feelings about skateboard art and actually using the board because it needs, the skateboard.
Yeah, yeah, it's a funny paradox, in fact, because nobody thought about saving these skateboards in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, or even 90s, because they were there's just, you rode them. You didn't think about sticking them on your wall. And later on, it became more of a collecting thing. Me personally, like I don't even know how many skateboards, tons of skateboards, but I have a few NOS skateboards, which is new old stock. And, I'm guilty. I've skated those things because my philosophy is like, just ride it. That's what it's for, right? But there's certain collectors that would never do that, right? Because you just want to preserve it in all its perfection if you can. And of course, I've got NOS boards as well. I refuse to skateboard, but I've definitely skated a few NOS boards. Yeah.
Yeah. And what is NOS? Sorry, I don't know if I.
It stands for new old stock. So
Okay.
basically, it's old skateboards that sat in warehouses or skate shops and collected dust for years and years and years. And once eBay happened, those skateboards
Mhm.
started to come out of the all these places, and people started to dig them up and whatnot. And that's how it kind of
Yeah.
started. Actually, there's a board back there. There's a Mark Gonzalez board on my wall, which I
Mhm.
was at a film festival in like 1994, and I walked into a skate shop and I was like, "What are you doing with that board?" And they're like, "Oh, it's NOS." And I was like, "What's NOS?" And they're like, "It's new old stock." And that kind of started me collecting boards, because that was like my favorite board in like in the 80s. And then I found it like in the early 90s. So it wasn't that old, but then
Mhm.
I kind of had this moment like, wow, I mean, this is these are like sacred skateboards to skateboarders.
Yeah. And it's also really interesting that you go into the film about like people like, Spike Jones and the people who've gone into have film careers and, that they started skating and then, eventually did films or were actors and things like that. And that's also interesting to just see how the art is all part of it. And even,
Yeah, I mean, that not just Spike and Jason Lee, but there's so many people that you meet every day that grew up skateboarding. And because skateboarding was such a, back in the 80s and 90s and 70s, it wasn't as accepted. It was, rebellious against other sports. We don't really think of skateboarding as a sport because it's not like a team thing. So, a lot of people were inspired by that, and they went on to do other creative things. And skateboarding is kind of a vehicle to express yourself, and the community around you is always encouraging of that. So these,
yeah.
quite a few people that have, achieved much bigger success, but their roots are still in skateboarding.
Yeah. Do you, it seems to be pretty male dominated sport, but now that you see more women coming and people coming up through it, do you see skateboard art coming from women too, also being in these galleries?
Yeah,
Have you,
absolutely. I think it's
yeah,
great that there's all these female skateboarders. As kids, we wish there were more female skateboarders, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So now that these girls are like really great skateboarders, I'm sure they're making art. I know of a couple of female skateboarders that are making art, and yeah, of course, yeah, that'd be
yeah,
great.
yeah. I know. I just noticed that we see it more,
Mhm.
on television and stuff like that than we had, with women in snowboarding and also skateboarding and
Yeah.
things like that. And I just didn't know if there was like certain artists that were coming up and coming that you know of, maybe in that world. But I'm glad to know that that it's pop, but it's also considered kind of a fine art in a way too. Seeing it.
Yeah, it's always been like, making a movie, there's always been this kind of not debate, is it art, is it fine art, is it graphic art, like what is art, and that sort of kind of endless, you know, controversy, right?
Yeah,
So it's like, yeah, of course you put a pencil on a paper and you make a scribble, it's art, right? We don't
yeah,
really value art based on what the art world thinks, because
yeah,
we're we're outside of that world, and that world is bought and sold by billionaires. So who
yeah.
cares what they're doing, right? It's
Right.
it's just a different mentality altogether.
Yeah, but some of those shots that you had in there of those exhibits, of the art exhibits of the boards and stuff, they were so intricate and really interesting. Like you would walk through what
Mm.
looked like the hand or whatever, into then seeing the stuff, the boards on the wall or the skateboards on the wall and everything. I think that was really,
Yeah,
um, I
there's
wanted to see it. I was like, why have I missed one of these?
yeah, there's a really great show that they did in Paris, that had like some really great installations there. And Ed Templeton,
Mhm,
who's also a pro skateboarder, artist, painter, he's done some great large scale art, kind of skateboard inspired themes.
mhm.
Um, and so it's nice to see skateboard art kind of jump off the skateboard and into like a physical thing, like the giant screaming hand and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It really has a different impact.
Yeah. And so, I mean, do you just see that that it can coincide with it being in a gallery as well as it just is on, on the street and, street style and stuff like that. And that they can coexist at the same time, right? Without people thinking, no, I would never do that. Or,
Yeah, I mean,
why would I put it?
it's they were having skateboard art shows before it became like a big thing, right? Or a
Mhm.
more normalized thing. I think it really comes down to who the artist is and what they're saying with their art, right?
Yeah.
There's it doesn't really matter that it's a skateboard artist, it just becomes art at that point. One thing that does kind of like annoy me is when people who aren't skateboarders put art on skateboards and then put that in their show, right?
Yeah.
Right. And the one thing that also
Yeah.
annoys me is when people like that do that, they always choose the typical popsicle skateboard shape because they're just like generic boards. And I personally like collect most of my boards are board with shapes because it's from a
Yeah.
different era. And that's come back quite a bit. Actually, skateboarding now, there's a lot of kids that are skateboarding old school shapes, which is really fun to watch.
Yeah, and because there's also a part where you see the commodity, the people doing commercials with skateboards trying to make, hey, it's now mainstream, it's cool and stuff like that. So yeah, it's definitely a difference for.
That's been going on for quite a while, right? I mean, that started probably back in the 70s with like the Pepsi had a skateboard team, right, for a little while. And then there, of course, Mountain Dew did that. And then all these other energy drinks, which I'm not really personally a fan of. I'd rather skateboarders drink yerba mate or Samazon acai or just water, right? Because skateboarders are athletes underneath it all. And we didn't really think of ourselves as athletes when we're skateboarding, but this funny thing has happened in the last few years with the Olympics, where kids are like, oh, you have to train, right? And so there's this slight shift with kids realizing like, yeah, you got to stretch and you got to, build up some strength. But that's a whole other topic into itself.
Yeah, maybe that's your next movie.
Yeah.
Another 10 years?
No. God, no.
Oh, good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Matt. I appreciate it. And it was a really great film, and I'm so happy that people can see it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to show it to people. It's been a fun journey, and I want to thank everybody who's participated in the film and all the artists that have, contributed their time, and it's been a fun thing to put together.
Oh, that's great. Well, it's impressive. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.